Hello everyone. So Silent Hill 2 Remake has finally come out and I've recently beaten the game and I want to talk about it. I just want to say that this game blew mine and pretty much everyone else's expectations out of the water. I honestly can't believe how good this game is. I have a small handful of issues with it, but nothing major I can think of, but I'll get into that later in the video. I'm a big fan of the original, though I will say I played the original like not even a year ago, so I'm not a Silent Hill veteran or anything, but I do love the original game, so I'll probably make some comparisons here and there. This video will be spoiler free for the most part, but if I do talk about a spoiler, I will let you know. So let's start with visuals. I believe this game is an Unreal Engine 5 game, and let's just say you can tell, because this game looks amazing. The fog looks great as well, which is like the staple of this game, this franchise, I guess you could say. So they really had to get that right, and it seems like they did. I wasn't sure how that would translate to this game from the PS2 version, but I think they nailed the fog. The game does a good job at capturing the worn down, grungy looking look of the original. The areas are very faithful to the original in appearance and gameplay, I'd say. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is my personal favorite thing from the original to this remake, and that is the cutscenes and facial animations. In my opinion, they are so much better than the original. These characters feel so much more human, and you can deduce just from their mannerisms and facial animations that the characters are very mentally ill and there's actually something wrong with them. Obviously the dialogue helps with that too, but dialogue aside, before they even hint toward them being not quite right mentally, you can tell that something is wrong. I mean, you can see it in James as well, and James doesn't make it obvious through dialogue until closer to the end that he is actually struggling. So yeah, in my opinion, these cutscenes are way better than the original. I think the original captured the whole dreamlike vibe a bit better in the cutscenes. Honestly, I think the not as good visuals contribute to that, but the remake doesn't completely fail at it. It does do it pretty well, just not as good as the original in that regard, in my opinion. Also, this game is extremely dark. Like, some of the areas are pretty much pitch black wherever you're not pointing your flashlight, which sounds annoying, but I think the flashlight is good enough that I actually like how insanely dark it is. Alright, so on to audio. First off, the music is great, just like the original. They changed the tracks a bit, at least some of the really iconic ones, but I didn't mind the changes. I'm sure someone out there will absolutely despise the small changes to some of the music in this game. I mean, music is super subjective, but I didn't think it took away anything from the game. So yeah, original has amazing music and so does the remake. Not much more to say here. So the voice acting in this game is also incredible. I think James's performance in particular is amazing, and the voice actor Luke Roberts, he's been in a bunch of movies, but good acting does not translate to good voice acting always. But in this case, it absolutely did, apparently. And this is probably a hot take to the Silent Hill community, but I thought James's voice acting in the original was pretty bad. I don't know if he just got bad voice direction or what, but his voice acting didn't really fit the vibe of a lot of those really dark cutscenes, in my opinion. So Angela sounded great too. I wasn't feeling it in the beginning, but her performance was so good in some of the later areas of the game that her voice acting grew on me. This will be a slight spoiler, so if you don't want to hear it, you can skip to the timestamp on screen, but it's not a huge spoiler. The scenes before and after the monster that Angela is dealing with, you know, the boss that symbolizes her abuse and shit, that boss, those scenes in the remake were fucking heartbreaking. They hit so much harder in this remake. You know what else hit so much harder? The melee combat. Sorry. But in all seriousness, the melee combat sounds powerful and impactful, and it stays fun throughout the entire game. Like, it never got old for me beating the shit out of everything in sight. I use the steel pipe for like 90% of the enemies in the game. Also, stomping is fun. I always love doing that in Dead Space. The sounds of the guns were fine. They were serviceable, in my opinion. But could they have been better? Yeah, but that's a nitpick because they really don't sound that bad. I've heard far worse. So let's talk about the sound design of the areas and stuff like that in general. There are so many creepy ass noises you hear in this game, most of which go completely unexplained, which I think makes it even creepier. You hear creaks, thumps, footsteps, whispers. It's genuinely terrifying. This is a game where the noises being unexplained works because in Silent Hill, the town, not the game, anything really goes because the town kind of just does whatever it wants, right? So on to gameplay. I've already talked about the melee combat, but how is the shooting? Well, it's odd. It's not great, but I think it's intentionally not great. James isn't like John Wick or anything. He's not supposed to be good at fighting and shooting necessarily. So the shooting feels a bit clunky, and for that reason, I don't mind it. The puzzles are really good in this game. A lot of them were from the original, of course, but I believe some of them weren't. And the ones that I'm 99% sure are new were also great. Most of them were really unique and also fun to solve, and I'm not really a puzzle guy, and they get pretty tough too. Like, I literally had to look up like 2 or 3 of them because I was too stupid to figure them out after like 15 minutes. So the navigation through the areas was also very well done in my opinion. Like, they're not really confusing as I thought some of the original games areas were. So let's talk about scare factor. Is the game as scary as the original? Well, I'd say it's just as scary, if not more. Probably more, to be honest. And all the unexplained noises are a big contributor to that. That prison section of this game was one of the most terrifying areas I've played in a horror game in a very long time. That section will have you on edge the entire time, and because of that, it's probably my favorite area in the game. Okay, so I'll briefly talk about the story because there's not much to say here. No spoilers or anything. The story is great. It's really good, but I mean, that goes without saying because the original story was amazing. So it's preserved perfectly here, and seeing the endings remade is just really nice to see. I've only seen 2 of the endings so far, but the ones I have seen were really well done while also being faithful to the original. Supposedly the remake added 2 new endings, but I haven't seen them yet, but hopefully those ones are good too, since Bloober Team will have nothing to go off of for those 2 endings, but I'm sure they'll be fine. I also want to highlight that even though I already knew the twists and turns and already knew what was going to happen, it was still just as enjoyable. Alright, so now I'm going to get into my problems with the game, which there really is not many. The biggest problem I have with this game is the lack of enemy variety. The original had this same problem, but the original was like half the length of this game, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But this game took me almost 20 hours to beat. I was really taking my time, so fighting the same like 4 or 5 enemy types over and over and over again got pretty tiresome by the end, I gotta be honest. My other problem, which isn't really pertaining to the game at all, is that at first glance at least, the trophy list seems a bit more tedious than it really needs to be. You have to get every ending. There's about 8 I believe, and there is some things you can do to get multiple endings in a single playthrough if you do it right, but you can't really do that for every single ending, so that's a bit much for me. I am a trophy hunter, so that is why I care about that. Maybe I'll change my mind on this and realize it's not as bad as I think it is, but we'll just have to see. But those are pretty much my only issues with the game, really, and that's pretty much everything. Overall, amazing game. Bloober Team had huge shoes to fill here, and they could not afford to mess this up, but they managed to blow everyone's expectations away. I think if they fucked this up, no one will be buying another Bloober Team game ever again. They already had a pretty rocky reputation, so this game saved them, if you ask me. So I guess the question is now, will they do a Silent Hill 3 next? I imagine they will, especially if Silent Hill 2 sells well, which I imagine it will, considering it's a remake of one of the most beloved horror games of all time. Praise does not always equal sales, but in this case, I think it will sell well, enough to warrant another remake at least. I completely failed to mention the possibility that they could do a Silent Hill 1 remake next instead of 3, which honestly, that game deserves a remake treatment way more than 3. I tried to play Silent Hill 1 on an emulator on a PC, but the controls were horrendous. I didn't even get 2 hours into the game before I put it down, so that game could really use a remake. So yeah, we'll see what comes next. We have at least 2 more Silent Hill games that have been in development for a while now, that being Silent Hill F and Silent Hill Townfall, both of which we know absolutely nothing about. So chances are we'll see those before whatever the next remake is, if there's going to be one. But that's about it. Tell me if you guys have any legitimate problems with the game, because I really had almost nothing to complain about, but I'm sure some Silent Hill veterans have a way higher standard for this game than I do. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.